This video is for you if you're ambitious enough to want to build a nine-figure company in the pay-per-lead business and eventually sell it to a private equity firm for multiple eight figures or nine figures. Because essentially it's going to be the single most in-depth breakdown of a pay-per-lead business that exists on the whole internet. We're not going to be only diving into the financial data that I've directly basically took from the government of the United Kingdom, right? All of that is legit data that's on a public database. But we're also going to be investigating what kind of business infrastructure they actually built over the last 10 years, what kind of ads they're running, to be able to do 145 million in turnover and essentially get acquired up by a private equity company. And we're not going to be only giving you basically the shallow information, right? We're going to be diving balls deep into all of the financials, their strategic plays, and how management is consolidated with a private equity firm that has eventually essentially bought them because they're that good of a business, right? The business is called Marketing VF, and essentially they did 145 million in turnover. Stop this video and take a look at this breakdown that I've pulled beautifully from Cloud Code. And specifically, right, they are operating mostly in North America, right? That's where most of their money is coming from, even though they're a UK business. So I'll also be breaking down that. And some of the verticals that they're in is specifically super high ticket verticals that have super high lifetime value. So, for instance, in pay per lead, you want to be essentially selling data and customer opportunities, right, to companies. Now, they're in the verticals such as B2B software and services, tech start, and like basically also SaaS like websites, right? So the client lifetime value is in the 4 to 5 figures because in for instance a CRM, a customer relationship management, like go high level, you're going to be using that forever, right? Super sticky service that eventually will compound into 5 figures of lifetime value. And specifically, those are all very good verticals that they're in. Some of the brands I've listed here, and we're going to be going over some how they structured some of their brands later in the video. Here clear is like hearing aids, which is super impressive, right? Because I've never it's like such a weird vertical, but yet, right, super high intent customers, right? Because it's like basically customers that cannot hear need the service. So if you can gain their trust, that trust is worth a lot when that customer opportunity is essentially sold to large companies, right? And here we have, for instance, expert reviews that also reviews consumer electronics and products and other softwares in the B2B Netherlands market in the EU, right? So a lot of it is software, SaaS, very sticky, high ticket, reoccurring services, right? And a very, very highly educated target segment. So we're going to be also going over specifics on their business infrastructure now, because it's you need to basically understand how their whole business works if you want to understand these numbers, right? They have 400 people, so it's not like not like it's a lot of people, man. And specifically, what we can see is they basically have leads is all they sell, customer opportunities, and they have a few brands: Expert Market, Techco, Eco Expert, Startups.co, and an affiliate network. And what that essentially means is they pay their affiliates a fixed amount for an additional lead or customer opportunity, right? So if they sell a lead for like made £100, like a CRM lead, somebody who wants to buy like a customer relationship management tool, like go high level, right? They would be buying that for £50 from an affiliate that's super good at media buying and basically make the margin of £50. Buy it £50, sell it for £100. That's the affiliate network. Obviously, they also run their own paid channels, which we're also going to be covering. But they're in a very high intent market audience, which makes it like they need to be working different, right? Because these people, business owners, they're smart. Buying a CRM, right? That's a big decision that could impact a lot of aspects of your business. You don't want to just like buy it without doing your research. So what they did that's so smart is they essentially have websites, right, where they review stuff. all of these websites, they're not like a usual comparison site, right, where it's basically just a list of a bunch of websites that like are good. They actually have super useful information about these website builders, for instance, right, like Wix, Squarespace, Hostinger, and even YouTube videos that explains and compares these brands. So if you're a business owner and you get this amount of useful information, you're obviously going to trust them. That's why that lead is going to be converting at a higher percentage, right? So for instance, like 100 people that go to this website, maybe like 5 to 10 of them convert if they don't have useful information, but maybe now 15 to 20 people convert, right? Because they trust them with all this useful value they've been given. And this is how basically they're acquiring the trust of the consumer and selling that trust to businesses like Wix, Hosting, or Shopify. These are all their partners, right? Pretty large companies nonetheless. And if you go to like Expert Market, right, they have everything: vehicle tracking, CRM software, web design, right? And they basically have articles where they review stuff, right? So they're essentially a review comparison site. And what's really interesting, right, is that they run paid media, right, like meta ads, just some like really basic advertisements they run to their essentially their reviews and their consumer like trust building assets, because essentially they do not want to acquire your customer data immediately. Like in most cases, there's basically in with most lead gen people, right, it's just an instant form. You put in your information and that's that. But here specifically, it's not just an instant form, right? It's like they're going to read the whole thing. They drive data out, like a lot of top of funnel leads to these sites so they can educate themselves and eventually become good leads by, for instance, trying hosting a Horizons. And now basically this is an affiliate, right? You guys can see it because I blurred out, but essentially they have an affiliate link. So if somebody becomes a customer with Hostinger, they get paid on the back end, right? So they can either get paid on a cost per qualified lead, cost per click, or cost per acquired customer basis. And obviously, in their case, I think CPA makes the most sense. That's where they're gonna make the money, because essentially they have that trust to convert these customers into paying clients, right? Now we're on the offer vault side, and we can see that Hostinger actually pays them on a 75% rev share basis. So that's not small money, right? Because Hostinger essentially like that's good money. 75% of the sale is like very decent, right? Because essentially the hosting is a monthly recurring website service, so they get most of their money on the recurring basis. So they're very comfortable with paying 75% of the percentage of the actual first sale, which is like very, very cool. And now that we have that, basically, now you understand how this company essentially tries to do their best to educate consumers with YouTube videos, reviews, comparisons to turn them into actual customers, right? So they can get paid for each additional customer they get for large website companies like Hostinger and a bunch of other ones, right? So essentially, the customer flow prospect fills out form, goes to their website. On the back end, I think they have something like an intent qualification where they rank leads from 1 to 10 based on like their intent or like how much of the website they interacted with. The tracking part of this is super important, right? Because essentially you're compiling all of this data, right? How long they were on your website, what kind of reviews they watched, right? Which buttons they clicked. It's all super comprehensive. So they can analyze that data and optimize their review sites and obviously top of funnel ads to make more profit. So this is like a more advanced pay per lead model that obviously I don't recommend beginners to go into. I recommend if you're like obviously down the line, if you're like fucking 4 or 5 years in, you have a bit of money saved up, you can build a sustainable brand like that super easily. Because essentially, right, they're paying these like 300 employees, which I think is way too much, right? AI is going to cut that in half easily, which is why you should build a nine-figure business and not get replaced by AI, obviously. But essentially, they have all these people writing blogs and doing all of this tech stuff, right? And maybe like a few good media buyers. But this is like still, I think it's like way too much for a company. Um, because I know like companies that have like 20 people that are doing more like in profit, not in revenue, right, but in profit. For instance, like I made a video on the specific verticals that are the best. And in some of the legal verticals, I know people that spend 2 million a month, and it's just one person, right, that's pulling in 2 million, uh, like sometimes in revenue, but like maybe one and a half in profit. So it's crazy. Check out my vertical video. It's an hour long. Obviously, my style is just to blabber on and make it super in depth and value packed for you guys. And let me know if you guys want to watch any other videos in the comment section below. I need to make a video every day. That's the contract I have with myself. So I just like would really appreciate any feedback. Um, and obviously, guys, they have a client portal. So all these big companies, to have like less sales and delivery, they have a custom software build out, so their enterprise customers like hosting, or they can go into that client portal and just buy whatever leads they want, right? In this market, this kind of lead that has this kind of information and qualification, right? And basically all of that stuff. And everything is pretty transparent reporting, and all is tracked. Like obviously paper lead is selling customer information, so this data, all of it needs to be analyzed and tracked down to a T. Now, some of the B2B clients they have are like billion-dollar companies, which is why they can take a portion of that and really scale up, right? Home improvement, energy, healthcare, senior care, moving, insurance, some of their other B2C clients. So they're also not only doing B2B, but also B2C. They're more like horizontally dispersed, so they go into all kinds of markets, right? 250 brands, 40 different channels, and 200 geographies. So their revenue basically makes sense. Operating profit of 7.52 million, and specifically they could get more profit probably, but they're basically, I'm going to be diving into how that's not beneficial for them, because they want to invest in their growth to be more bigger, because eventually essentially this company, right, they were acquired by a private equity firm, and I'll explain to you exactly what their strategic goals are and how that all ties in together with Paperly, because now it's going to get super fucking interesting. I'm going to become like a business professor, right, and teach all of this juicy stuff that I basically copy and pasted into Claude and am understanding for the first time myself, right? So first, before we discuss how a private equity company basically bought them, we're gonna go over some of their balance sheet, because it's also super interesting to see how exactly a paper lead company at that size allocates its funds to grow. And most of it obviously is like software tech. They spend a lot obviously because they have to, right? That's like a lot of different subscriptions on different probably a large part of this is basically their assets, like these comparison sites, right? They're worth a lot. So that's like 4.8 million. Office furniture IT kit is like 2 million, which is like a lot, man. That's crazy. Loans to group companies, and I'll explain exactly how that works in a moment. Cash 29 million with MVFOs. They owe like creditors 26 million, and they have like a lease that's 8.6, right? And net worth left over is like 50 mil in the bank. And here's some gross margins and operating margins that I don't really understand that well. Even though I was 3 years in one of the best business schools in Europe, I don't know any of this, because school is a scam, and don't go to school. If you're in school, fuck off and do not go to school. Watch my videos, make money online, right? And build a nine-figure business. Now, they have like 300 staff members at 75 like pound. That's like 100 grand per head, right? That's a lot they're paying to staff, because that means like every staff member is getting paid like 7,000 pounds, something like that. Even though I'm Asian and Chinese, my math is really fucking awful. So please excuse me. My ancestors are not happy with me, I can guarantee you. Payroll, even though I'm making more money with them than them. So I think they're pretty happy actually. Never mind. We're gonna go into specifically how, right, why they're borrowing so much money, because essentially a private equity firm bought it. I looked it over in the balance sheet, and they set up like two shell companies, right? That's basically, like how like like these cartels have shell companies to move money around, right? Like the money laundering. That's basically the same stuff, but legally. Obviously, everything is legally. Oh my God, can I even say that on YouTube? I don't know, but anyways, specifically they have set in like a company that did a leveraged buyout. And what that essentially means, right, the private equity firm, all they want is to make money. Like that's basically the goal of everybody on this planet. But how they do it is super smart. Like they probably have an Asian math guy named like James, right? And it's like crazy because what a leveraged buyout essentially is, and why they set up all these like shell entities so that Lock Bitco borrowed like all this money from the bank, right? 63 million to be exact, is because they did a leverage buyout. So essentially, the private equity firm, what they did is they want to sell this company, right? They already bought it, right? But their goal is to grow this company to be more valuable so they can sell it in 4 or 5 years and make a profit. And how that essentially works, right? Like in scenario A, for instance, the PE pays £100 million for the MVF, and they borrow nothing and sell like MVF 5 years later, specifically for 40 million more, and they get like 40% margin, right? Decent but slow, right? Because you used 100 million of your own money, and that has like value, and that's like stuck for 5 years, which is not good. Here, essentially, in scenario B, which is the smart way to do it, and where you make more money, where you make the same amount of money but put in way less of your money, is the leverage buyout, because they essentially not pay only 37 million with their own cash, and they borrow 63 million like I showed you from the bank. Now they sell for the same price, in comparison, right? They sell for the same price 5 years later and pay the bank back 63 million plus interest, so let's say 70 million, and they made maybe like 30. This is wrong, so maybe they made 33 million in profit, right? Because obviously they need to pay the bank the interest, and that's why they used made 7 million less, but they also didn't use 100 million of their own money, but only 37 of their own cash, right? So that's how basically they try to pay as little as with their own money as possible, but use the bank's money and the cash flow that's coming from this pay-per-lead business to pay off the bank's interest, right? So essentially, the bank lent them 36 million to buy this company essentially, right? And marketing MVF has to pay off the bank plus interest within the next 5 years. And they have like all this revenue, so it's completely doable, and all this cash and profit, right? So it's very doable within the range of 5 to 6, 10 years. I don't know how long, but essentially, it's a very, very smart way that they were acquired. And now we not only have the owners of the business that we need to take into account what their goals are, but also the goals of the private equity firm, right? Because they are the big boss. They're the big boss owner that essentially, and they maybe have like a board of directors for MVF specifically, because obviously they need like a board of directors to all do the day-to-day operations, CEO, CFO, and all of that stuff. But what is really interesting, right, about this leverage buyout is that they need to also motivate the people here that's responsible for the actual business, right? The CEO, CFO, to work hard. So essentially, what they promised them is what is essentially called, right, F loans or something, right? That's they call it like F something, F shares. So what is F shares is that it's a P incentive structure. So they incentivize the board of directors, CEO, to do well, to get to this goal by giving them a specific amount of the payout. So essentially, in 45 years, when the PE company decides to sell marketing VF, that's for instance in the hypothetical scenario of 140 million, right? If they hit this target, the board of directors is gonna get a portion of that money, like in shares, obviously. So, for instance, if they hit their goal of 140 million, they're gonna be paid out. Everything under that goal, they're not gonna get paid out because that F share is not gonna be of value, right? So you need to hit over a specific goal, right? And then they get paid, right? So it needs to be over 140 million that the directors achieved over 4 or 5 years to grow this company to or be worth 140 million. So the private equity can sell it for 140 million. That's when the directors get paid. So they need to hit that KPI, key performance indicator, and threshold, for instance, of 140, like 40% growth or whatever that might be. So that's super interesting. And why is it that this private equity company actually paid all this money, right? They have so much faith. Imagine putting 100 M's on the line, right? Just for 4 and 5 years later for it to work out. And the reason is because they have very good like sites, right? They have very sticky website builder experts, a lot of traffic probably on these sites, right? If you're interested, you can go on SEMrush and work it out. But all of this is brand, right? It's a pay per lead brand that people and consumers trust over the years. Expert market, for instance, is a pretty big one, and it's not only in one market, right? It's like in multiple markets. So they're like dispersing the risk by not only being in one market. That's what private equity people like. They want to see that the company is not risky, right? That they have a multitude of brands that are like with SEO, that they have organic people coming in. So it's not only paid advertisement, right? It's also organic brands that attract organic. That's why I always think like if you're in a vertical for long enough, 2 3 years, build out your comparison site. It's only going to be so much more valuable in the long run, right? Um, and specifically, they basically bought the company, right? Because they have all of this infrastructure, affiliate network, software, and, like basically the whole business infrastructure I went over. But the most important part is obviously the brand. A home buddy, a home service site also like scaled to like 100 million in like 4 years, 3.5 years, something. I made a video on it, right? And they were also basically paid out a large section because they have all this organic traffic coming, like they build up from their brand essentially. And what's really cool, right, is that now that you understand how the private equity side of everything works, right? How basically this company is now just trying to invest in its growth so they can be sold at a higher price, 140 million, or some other number that I don't know. But that's why they have all these loans, right? So essentially, they loaned 24 million to marketing VF loan 24 million to lock Bitco to pay off bank lenders. So they keep all the money here, right, in lock Bitco, so it's cleaner and a bunch of accounting stuff so they can pay off the bank lenders. So that's also quite smart. And if we dive into this deeper, right, a lot of this is like debt service or what I just said, and they basically centralize all of their cash at the top because it's easier and uh, cheaper to manage, which is super interesting. I didn't know this before. And yeah, they don't let them sit on large cash balances. So the PE firm, right, the big boys, they keep all of the money here and here, probably here. So the PE has more control over where the money is spent, right, as opposed to the board of directors. So now we have two people that are basically bosses. This is the big boss, and this is like the small boss. And specifically, what's really also pretty cool is that like their current assets, right, and current liabilities are like this, and they have all of these creditors that they need to pay off, right? So they need to pay off like 100 1.3 in taxes, pensions, and a bunch of other stuff. So specifically, this was, wow, I talked for so long, I loved it. Super interesting stuff, right? About a 140 million company. I hope this video was like enlightening. If you guys have questions, I have Telegram, Instagram is open. If you need coaching, also let me know. I basically talk a lot, and I will give you everything that I know of to make you more money. And ciao ciao, boys and girls, probably just boys.